Hello, my name is Kim Knowlton. I'm Senior Scientist at the Natural Resources Defense Council in New York, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today remotely to talk a bit about the heat index and its possible use in India as a metric for thresholds in heat action plans, which I know you all are talking about today. With that, I'm going to shift from me to the slides. I want to have some slides to talk with you about this topic. Um, Indeed, since 2009, my colleagues and I at the Natural Resources Defense Council have had the honor of working with partners in India and especially starting in Ahmedabad in Gujarat state on developing and serving as knowledge partners to develop heat health action plans to respond to heat waves and the health challenges from extreme heat. Thanks to the immense leadership of the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation, of IIPHG, now of NDMA, of IMD, our many excellent partners. There's been quite successful development, implementation, and now scaling of heat action plans from their start in Ahmedabad to now over 100 cities and districts in 23 states in India. And we're grateful to be a part of that, grateful for the partnership, and to all of the partners, many of whom are shown here in logo form. We're also grateful to have been part of building the evidence base linking climate, heat, health, and what can be done about it. You see some of the publications that have come out of the work just here, pictured. Heat action plans, the setting of thresholds of those environmental metrics, temperature, daily maximum temperature, most often, that are used to determine thresholds, measurements beyond which different levels of heat alert come into play, depending on what each city sets as the set of actions. And indeed, this is something, a process determining thresholds that has been important not only in India and with our partners all across India, but it always pertains to creating heat wave early warning systems. And indeed, different locations around the world use different metrics and measures. The table pictured at the right is from a World Health Organization, World Meteorological Organization publication that gives guidance on heat waves and heat action plans and early warning systems. Has proven quite useful. You get a sense from the table of the wide variety of temperature metrics that can be used in setting thresholds that are useful. On the table, you can see, for example, that heat indices, the heat index, which we'll talk about a little bit more, has been used in the United States of America in many locations. Heat index measures that exceed a certain level for more than 2 days have often been used as the kind of the kickoff, the threshold to enact different levels of heat alert and different activities. Sometimes daily health data is not accessible to use in setting thresholds. That is quite a common situation. But in those cases, many locations, many cities, many countries and states have used a percentile approach. We're using historical data, often a 95th or 99th percentile value can be determined through calculation, and that may serve as an appropriate threshold temperature in this case to then enact different health alerts. In many ways, because those percentile values are often linked to different levels of health harms. Were the city or the state or the country to have more accessible health data. So it provides a really quite a sound alternative approach, and indeed you can see from the table, it's used in many locations, a percentile. The heat index is quite useful in that it combines the effects of extreme temperatures, high extreme temperatures in this case, and high relative humidity. The combined effect of that in determining what an extremely hot day feels like sensibly to the human body. And that is because, in large part, when relative humidity, which here in this slide and others may be abbreviated RH, and heat index may be abbreviated HI, temperature we will call T. But the thing is, when relative humidity is high, the evaporation rate of one's perspiration from the body slows. That means the body cools less efficiently and people retain heat. They sensibly feel a greater degree of heat and more harmful health effects can result. The heat index, as it's designed and calculated, is most effective, pertains most to temperatures that are above 26 degrees Celsius and with relative humidities at or above 40%. So you can see it's designed to speak to relatively warm and relatively humid conditions. Interestingly, and important to note for this discussion, it was designed for conditions that are not in direct sunlight, in which winds are light, and it's been noted that full sunshine, direct sunlight, can really increase heat index values by quite a bit, by up to 8 degrees Celsius. It's also been noted by those developing the heat index that strong winds and especially hot, dry air in those winds are very hazardous to health. So if those conditions pertain, perhaps heat index is not the most appropriate calculation to use. And what is the calculation? The next slide gives a sense of the relative complexity, let's say, of the calculation itself. That said, it really does use two measures. T here, for the purposes of this equation, which has been adjusted to pertain to degrees Celsius. T is the ambient dry bulb temperature, measured in degrees Celsius. Relative humidity is a percentage value of relative humidity between 0 and 100%. This equation is taken from the U.S. National Weather Service. Often one will see heat index formula in degrees Fahrenheit, but of course that's much less relevant here for work in India. There are other ways to present this heat index calculation, and one that's been quite useful is a tabular format like this. This is taken from NDMA's heat guidelines, the document from 2016 that they issued. And here you can see that one can read the temperatures, the dry bulb ambient temperatures across the top of the chart in green here, and the relative humidity range of values down the left-hand column. In doing that, for example, one can see that if the ambient dry bulb temperature is, say, 34 degrees Celsius, but the relative humidity is 80%, you come across the chart, use the point at which they intersect, and one sees that the heat index value in that case would be 52 degrees Celsius. It's shown here in red because it falls into an extreme danger category in terms of health impact. So we can see that humidity really does amplify the effects of temperature alone. This is just a different version of the chart, same chart with degrees Fahrenheit and Celsius translated within the cells, but one can see that the format is the same. So heat index is quite a useful way to translate the effects of humidity and heat together. Along with our partners in India, and others, colleagues, we have heard quite a bit of interest in asking a few questions. The questions revolve around, could the heat index be used as an appropriate heat action plan threshold in India? To try and unpack that, there's a few other questions within there. And one of the first being, do cities or states, or, I'm using cities here as just sort of a, the user, the group that's interested in setting a threshold. Do cities have access to past, to present, and to future forecasts of local conditions, the local maximum heat index values? Is that data already accessible, or would it be a matter of a calculation of that information using, other data, having to use that formula? So that's data availability and access is one important first consideration. Part of that, the second question here is, does IMD already provide that heat index information for cities and other users in a format that's user-friendly, that's really accessible, that's quite easy to read, since conditions change, daily and even hourly? Third part, if it's often coastal cities who experience extremely humid conditions, and who perhaps may be interested in applying a heat index, would it be relevant to those locations who experience high humidity to perhaps apply IMD's current heat wave definition as a threshold? That being, for days on which temperatures are 40 degrees Celsius or more, for heat wave to be declared. Could that be a viable alternative to the heat index, and to what extent has that possibility been explored? Just again, a discussion item. And last piece of this, we've heard our partners and other interested people ask, do we need to think about a new formula to calculate heat index, one that pertains specifically to the conditions in India? Should that be undertaken? I offer no exact answers to any of these, but rather for the group that's really great questions, given the experience and the expertise of everyone in the room. This slide is asking us to return to that question of effective format and way of presenting the information. Sometimes it's called a dashboard. Is there a way of presenting past, present, and future forecast for heat index and heat index values that would be possible for both the producers of that information to provide and for the user community, the nodal officers in the cities, those who are going to use and put the alerts into action, for people to use those? So that's the form of the information is probably as important as the access, and does it so given these kind of foundational questions, some suggestions for future questions that this group may want to engage in discussion on, and some more investigation, include these: to really get a sense and determine which regions and which cities have been asking about and are most interested in applying a possible heat index approach for heat action plan threshold setting. That's one. Another question is to evaluate where the health evidence exists regarding which cities may have access to health effect information to really explore the degree to which humidity is adding additional harms to the health outcomes, and especially when cities have large communities, especially vulnerable to the heat. So to what extent is the health evidence and health data available? A third question might be about access. Which cities, do all cities, how many cities of those who are interested have access to the archives, to the today's daily heat index values, and to forecasts of heat index? So that's about accessibility in possible threshold setting. The fourth question is this one of whether there needs to be a rethink of heat index calculation, and does there need to be a new setting of that, a new discussion about how to do that that pertains specifically to India and its conditions and needs. And the last one, discussion point, is to really especially in a setting like this meeting, this summit, is to get the producers of that kind of information and the users to understand each other's common interests in asking these questions and asking about what threshold values really can be the most useful to protect people's health and to put alerts into at an appropriate time. So this meeting provides a great forum for that. There can be follow-on conversations to ask the questions about the metrics, about the archived and forecasted data and its availability, the form of the heat index data, its presentation, and unique to India heat index calculation, whether that's needed, what would be needed, and who would have to be around the table should there be an interest in that. These are some really important next steps that it would be great if people could talk further about this. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to float those ideas, many of which come from us listening to the conversations among partners and among meetings like this. It's important because the question we could all ask, do heat action plans really make a difference? And is heat vulnerability really being reduced after launching a heat action plan? You know, the thresholds are part of an overall heat action plan. These are really important questions. We tried to ask ourselves this question in the city of Ahmedabad and with our partners there to try and evaluate conditions before the heat action plan launched in Ahmedabad in 2013 and after. NRDC, with our partners in Ahmedabad, took a look at those before and after conditions, looked at the numbers and rates of mortality from all causes in the heat season from the years before the launch of the heat action plan, starting in 2007, and then for a couple of years after the heat action plan was launched. We compared behaviors and experience in those pre-action plan years from 2007 to 2010 and a couple of post-heat action plan years, 2014 to 15. And we were surprised, extremely interested, and extremely encouraged to discover that Ahmedabad has avoided more than 1,100 deaths annually over an annual heat season since the city first implemented their heat action plan in 2013. It suggests that these kind of adaptations to reduce people's heat vulnerability can really save lives. And in particular, the mortality rates on days above 40 degrees Celsius showed about a 5% decrease after the launch of the HAP relative to those years before the action plan launched. And the mortality rates on the very hottest days above 45 degrees Celsius showed an even more robust decrease, a 27% decrease in the years after the heat action plan. This is an exciting and very encouraging line of evidence and inquiry. Certainly evaluating heat action plans is an area that's ripe for more investigation in all cities that have undertaken to implement the plans. And we encourage more studies and more discussion about this, but mostly we say thank you to our partners and in all of the cities that have made their own adaptations to the plans and are launching such plans. For any of us, of you there in the room who may be interested in reading more background on the heat index, here are 5 papers and reports from recent years that may be of interest to you. And for the heat index calculation itself, there are 2 resources that were used to develop this talk. And mostly, as I said, I want to say thank you to you all for the opportunity, for the privilege of being there sort of remotely, but also of sharing these questions and ideas with you. And I look forward through my NRDC colleague, Polash Mukherjee, who is there with you, and our other colleagues to engage in more discussion about the heat index and to keep learning from you. It's been a privilege to be a part of the meeting and a privilege to be part of the heat action plan work. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and this concludes my talk for today. Thank you.